Well, spooky season is upon us, and I really can't think of a better time to talk about the Boogeyman. Not that one. That's better. So let's take a look back at the haunting run of the Boogeyman in WWE. Wrestling has always been filled with ghosts, goblins, ghouls, and monsters of all kinds, and to varying degrees of success. But there's a character that I love and wish more people had an affinity for, and that's the Boogeyman. Boogeyman came out of the shadows for the first time on SmackDown in 2005. However, the man behind the paint, Marty Wright, had been trying to get into the wrestling business since the 90s. As he'd stated in interviews later on, he wanted to join WCW's power plant, but didn't know the right people. So, Wright pursued a career in acting. He'd find sporadic roles in Hollywood movies like Transporter 2, The Replacements, and Any Given Sunday. And in late 2004, just after appearing in Transporter 2, Wright was finally given another chance at wrestling stardom, when his agent was able to get him a spot in the casting call for WWE Tough Enough Season 4. This season of the show would be a segment on SmackDown, much like the Diva Search was a part of the Raw broadcast, instead of being a standalone reality show, as in years past. The two-day casting event would see the hopefuls dwindle from about 100 down to a final 8 that would go on to compete for the contract on SmackDown. Wright would impress the judges with his incredible athleticism and his intensity. But he'd just miss out on the final 8 when it was revealed that he'd lied on his application about his age. The age cutoff was 35, and Wright was 40.
How old are you?
30.
How old are you?
30.
Don't lie to us. How old are you?
30.
You lying to us?
30.
What's your license say?
30.
What does your birthday say in your license?
My birthday says...
Read it to me.
7/15/64. Yes, right, I am 40.
I think you're a tremendous athlete. You look great. We can't stand lying. It's one thing we don't have. You're cut.
And by the way, this was the same Tough Enough season that featured The Miz, Ryback, and Daniel Puder. It was a pretty stacked season. Marty Wright may have been out of the competition, but he wasn't done with WWE. A mere days later, he got a call and a developmental offer from WWE. So, in January 2005, he was off to train in Louisville at Ohio Valley Wrestling. But what do you do with a 40-year-old barely trained wrestler? Well, you gimmick the hell out of him. So, in June of that year, Marty Wright was gone from OVW because the Boogeyman had arrived. Though a more simplistic version of what we would come to know, all the elements of the character were there. The staff, the toothless, creepy grin, some face paint, and a gimmick that I really like in retrospect, the horns. I get why more wrestlers don't use horns without a mask, but it was a very cool and scary addition to the character. The idea and motivation of the character was simple: terrorize and beat down anyone who summoned him. Thankfully for the talent of OVW, the Boogeyman would only stick around for a couple of weeks. The following month on Raw, vignettes began to air hyping up the debut of the Boogeyman. The vignettes were then moved to SmackDown and finally dropped entirely when he hyperextended both of his knees. By October of 2005, Boogeyman was finally ready to make his TV debut, showing up at the invite of TV representative and JBL bullying victim Palmer Cannon. Storyline being that the Boogeyman promos were for a UPN TV show that never happened, but they still had the actor under contract, so now he was going to wrestle. Thankfully, that aspect of the character wasn't really pushed hard and was forgotten about pretty quickly. This final version of the Boogeyman's look was a massive upgrade. Gone were the horns and the vest, his face paint now covered his entire head, giving him a very Freddy Krueger-esque look in his red entrance lighting. The staff remained, but now released smoke a la Papa Shango, and added was a giant clock that Boogeyman slammed against his head while fire erupted. A not-so-subtle message to his opponent that time was up. He'd make his in-ring debut defeating Simon Dean on the December 2nd edition of SmackDown. And this is where the Boogeyman character became complete with the addition of worms, as he'd take out a handful, help himself to some, and even share some with Nova. This worms-eating bit really helped Boogeyman stand out from just being another spooky supernatural character to being all that, but also gross. It was an idea thrown out there by Fit Finlay as a joke while they were shooting promos, and Boogeyman had no problem trying it out. It was very reminiscent of Candyman, a scary guy who's not afraid of creepy crawlies in his mouth. It was wild. Boogeyman would end the year squashing opponents in seconds, leading into two absolutely iconic feuds. 2006 would start with the Boogeyman targeting JBL and his personal assistant, Jillian Hall. And JBL played the terrified heel brilliantly. And of course, the biggest moment of this feud being when Boogeyman made dinner out of Jillian Hall's mole. It happened on an edition of Piper's Pit featuring JBL and Jillian on an episode of SmackDown. Boogeyman would get uncomfortably close to Hall and bite the growth right off her face. It was really the only way to get rid of such a stupid idea.
I'm gonna throw up. That's disgusting.
The feud would culminate with Boogeyman making quick work of JBL at the 2006 Royal Rumble. His next feud leading to the road to WrestleMania would be with Booker T. Booker T taking exception to being scared off by a bucket of worms that Boogeyman had brought ringside while Booker T was on commentary. And obviously, things escalated from there. Boogeyman spent weeks stalking and tormenting Booker T and Sharmell. Also, I should mention, Boogeyman was the babyface here. Very rarely is it the good guy doing the stalking and the tormenting. The feud culminated at WrestleMania 22 with Booker T and Sharmell losing to Boogeyman in a handicap match. The highlight of the match being Boogeyman kissing Sharmell with a mouthful of worms. That's some great TV. Previous to that match, Boogeyman had torn a bicep during a house show, so after Mania, he took some time off to heal up. This was explained on television with a restraining order from Booker T and Sharmell against the Boogeyman. Why a supernatural being would abide by mortal laws is a mystery to me, but that's what they did. Shortly after SummerSlam, WWE started to promote the Boogeyman's return to television. But then something strange happened. Boogeyman was released on September 20th, but then he was re-signed a week later. While at the same time it was announced that he'd be sent to Harlem Heat's training school in Texas for some more seasoning. Clearly, WWE just jumped the gun in letting him go and just sent him away for a month instead. Boogeyman would return to SmackDown on October 27th, this time targeting The Miz. Again, the same formula. Boogeyman stalks and terrorizes, there's worms and spooky lighting, and then he beat Miz at Armageddon. And then, somehow, things got even stranger. To start 2007, Boogeyman found himself in a feud with Finlay. This obviously also included Finlay's sidekick Hornswoggle. So what's a Boogeyman to do to combat his foe in a little person? You get your own little person. And soon the WWE was introduced to Little Boogeyman. This led to a lot of bad comedy and bad matches, and the Boogeyman ended up on the losing end of the feud. Boogeyman would continue to lose on SmackDown for another couple of months before switching over to the ECW brand in the June draft. Boogeyman would spend the summer feuding with Matt Striker and another menacing figure in Big Daddy V until he'd have to take time off due to yet another injury. Boogeyman would return to WWE almost a year later in 2008 on Raw and attack the guys from Jackass, specifically Chris Pontius. He would return to ECW in December, where he'd find himself again feuding with The Miz, except this time it was with John Morrison as well. For the rest of 2008 and into 2009, Boogie would spend his time feuding with The Miz and Morrison, even teaming with Finlay, beating jobbers, and losing to everyone else, with his last full-time WWE appearance being on March 4th episode of ECW losing to Kane. He'd be released the next day. In the years since, Boogeyman has continued to make sporadic indie appearances and a few appearances for WWE, popping up to startle people in comedy spots, with his most recent appearance being in January of 2021 at the age of 56. The great thing about the gimmick is he can just show up from time to time in the paint well into his 60s. And I think that's pretty neat. And outside the ring, Marty Wright has found a very comfortable living as an aerobics instructor in Denver, where he continues to inspire and motivate people. I'm Scott from Retrospective. Thanks for watching.